Oh. Oh, okay. I guess we're doing this now, then. Hello, samurai and swordsman. My name is TB Skyen, and there's an animated teaser now for Spirit Blossom and for Yone. Both of them at the same time, as though the two things might actually be fully canon to each other in some weird and indistinguishable way. So, a little bit of backstory. Yone is the champion that I called that he's going to be Yasuo's brother, who's going to be the champion. I called that, just want to point that out. And Spirit Blossom is a set of skins that are set to launch alongside both apparently Yone and Lilia, the actual most recent champion who got added to the game. And the Spirit Blossom skins are based on Ionian folklore-ish, so they're sort of like you have these mythical characters like the Collector and the Taker and the Gatekeeper, and Ari there, who's the fox with the 9 tails, in case you couldn't tell, is the Gatekeeper, and Kindred is the Taker, which is why Kindred pops up and says, "Hi, here." That specifically right there, that is Wolf, but with the Spirit Blossom Kindred skin that hasn't been announced yet, but was leaked, so we know that it's... Then it was the whole thing. Exactly how much of this is supposed to be, like, real canon, and how much of it is supposed to be some sort of reenactment of an Ionian myth, kinda, sorta, but with champions that we know as the actors standing in place of the characters who the story is being told about. It's not 100% clear, because what is clear is that Yone is about to, well, he's about to do something really stupid, because that's how all good stories start. And then he's gonna get possessed by a demon, half possessed, kinda, maybe sorta possessed, and then at the end he's gonna show up in what seems to be the real world, with a lovely new mask on and a big sword, and have a really threatening pose as though he means to go and slaughter that entire village, which would certainly not be great. So, this is it. The other thing, like, all of that lore stuff, exactly how, which thing fits into where, and what things are canon and which ones aren't, let's leave that for another video, or maybe for never, because that's kind of not my jam. I like speculating, but I second guess myself all the time, so I never really feel that confident in my conclusions, and besides, people like the Crit are much better at it than I am. What I'm good at, I hope, I mean, otherwise, good lord, future of my YouTube channel seems uncertain, is animation breakdowns. At the very least, good enough to spend a little bit of time gushing over this bit of animation, and it's been a little bit of a while since Riot really put out like a fully traditional 2D animated anything for their champions, and this one is certainly a good showing for the cause. I don't know who the animation studio is. I couldn't find that out, at least not fast enough for, you know, how quick I like to put my videos out. Actually, Future Skyen jumping in here for a second. According to Jason Hendrick, who's one of the principal animators at Riot, the studio responsible for this animated short are Sun Creature Studios, a studio which, as you can tell from the reel that's going in the background here, are also responsible for some other League of Legends animation, not all of which I'm sure I'm instantly familiar with just to look at it, so that's interesting. Sun Creature Studios are a studio based in Copenhagen, Denmark. It's the country where I live in, and it's a bit of a blast from the past for me because they are a studio of animators who graduated, I think, from the Animation Workshop, which is a really very good animation school here in Denmark. And I actually ran into one of the founders of the studio on a train some years back, and we talked for a while about one of their animated shorts that had taken off and become a little bit of a viral hit, which was called The Reward, Tales of Elethrion, which is a fantastic animated short. I fully recommend you look it up, but it was a bit of, okay, cool. Didn't realize they would be involved with this, but Sun Creature Studios, there you are. Look them up. They do fantastic work. I know that the art director is an internal Rioter, someone internally at Riot who did the art direction on it, but that's about all I was able to find out. Usually when Riot does these things, they work with outside studios, either smaller independent studios or studios that have like major studio experience making these things. For their Arcane animated series, they're working with Studio Fortiche, who also did a whole bunch of the other promotional shorts for them, and who've done a huge amount of fantastic work on all kinds of other graphic creative things. Anyway, the short itself, such as it is, attempts to tell the story, as far as I can make out, of how Yone comes to be not dead anymore, and instead be alive, and also wear like a sick anime mask and have a cool anime sword and do anime things. Probably fight with Yasuo a bunch. That's probably gonna be happening. And the way it tries to tell this story is relatively simple. We start with Yone waking up clearly directly after having fought his brother, like desperate and panting and finding himself in a different world where he is met by Ari, or the gatekeeper, collector, one of the two. I think it's a gatekeeper because the thresh skin is technically the collector, so that would be the gatekeeper Ari, who guides him through the spirit realm. I think Spirit Blossom, it's some version of an afterlife spirit realm kind of situation, very much modeled after Ionia. And the storytelling technique here is very much a mood piece. It's very quiet, and especially like since I don't have the audio on, but even like just looking at the frames as they are, you see the camera is pretty much doesn't move for anything. We have like one camera move here as we pan up over the hill. But other than that, it's just cuts between landscapes. And especially as Ari guides Yone around, we get this static shot, like with some sort of feature in the environment completely centered, and then Yone walking through, and you get these match cuts where like his movement just is constant from left to right, but he's walking across different landscapes. And all of that contributes to this very quiet, serene sense of what the environment is like. There's nothing chaotic here. The camera isn't swinging around. There's no handheld jittering. There's not even any camera movements. It's this series of landscape paintings, basically, through which our wanderer moves peacefully. Even when they look a little bit like this purple smoke here and those statues, and I'm not sure. I think it's like a karma thing. No, that's Cassiopeia, obviously, with the snake tail. With the poison thing, even if it may be sinister, which it kind of is because she opens her eyes and looks at him, which is a lovely detail, it's all very quiet and peaceful. And again, the same thing with, like, as Wolf comes flying past here, like this giant Cube-looking motherfricker, it doesn't feel like, oh god, we're being attacked by a giant monster. It's more like, oh, that thing's here. This is flying past. Okay. Well, we're just going to keep wandering, because peace and quiet. And that's all in the direction. It's like, this is not a place of conflict at all. This is just a place where things exist. And then we come to the hill here with all the little Teemo statues, and Yone, perhaps understandably, decides to make a very different, although perhaps still rather stupid decision. Again, we get this static shot with some landscape feature centered. And this is clearly in disrepair. It's overgrown. There's nothing there. This thing is dead. It hasn't been alive for a long time, as it were. As a building, it hasn't been alive, maintained, interacted with for a long time, until someone comes along and gives it something to interact with. That's what Yone does when he passes by here. He gives this, like, the gate clearly reacts to him. And notice now, cherry blossoms. Now, cherry blossoms show up a few times in this short. The first time they show up is right here, as Yone comes out of presumably having been just cut down by Yasuo. Cherry blossoms swirl past as he's, like, looking for his sword, but as he calms down, they blow away. And then they don't show up again until we come past this gate here, and it whispers something to him, and the cherry blossoms blow towards it. And clearly this has some attraction to him. Because, like, you see this, and, like, just ignore the Teemos, but, like, you've got a golden tree, this heavenly path, this serene, misty landscape, la, 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 la. And then it's like, you see this, and it's like, gate of hell, demons are in here. The only reason why you would go in there, if you're not an idiot, is if something pulls you in there. And in Yone's case, that's the cherry blossoms. And the connection between the cherry blossoms and, well, what the cherry blossoms represent becomes extremely clear once we get into the cave and see they are Yasuo. The cherry blossoms are in some way representative of, or a visualization of, the memory of his death at the hands of his brother. They're a memory of that conflict that we started out with. And that red recurs in his anger, and in the demon especially. It takes on that cherry blossom red color. Not quite as pink, a little bit more angry looking, but like that red color coding remains with the demon versus the primarily sort of much more pale blue and purple that Yone's base outfit has. And certainly also blue and purple are the colors of Yone's own power, as he shows off so magnificently right here. But we'll get to that. We'll get to that. So that's the directorial style, and that's some of the color symbolism that's working in here. Because you can also really see that in the environments that we pass through, that there's basically no red anywhere. We have a little bit of sort of pale pinkish with the trees here, but other than that, it's all blue, teal, purple. Very cool hues. We've got purple flowers over here. There really isn't any red anywhere until cherry blossoms. Which is just very good color coordination, because it impresses upon you the sense that, oh, okay, this is like that red means something different. Like it's associated with something else. So let's take a look at the actual animation. Now, if you watched these animation breakdowns before, you know some of the stuff I'm going to be talking about. When I'm going to be talking about animating on 1s, 2s, 3s, 4s, 6s, and God knows whatever frame rates that they're working with. Now, I'm going to use the term frame rate because that's something gamers generally know what that is. Like, you know what the difference between 60 frames per second and 30 frames per second is. So we're going to be using that as the term, but in animation terms, you talk about animating on 1s, 2s, and 3s, and what that means is that for every frame of video, and this particular video file is rendered at 24 frames per second, same as most movies, certainly Disney movies, animating on 1s means that you animate on every single frame, and you can see that they do that here at the start as Yone is rising up, and we have all this light bloom. Every time I click frame forward or frame backwards, we get a frame of animation. But they don't keep that pace through the whole thing, because this is a piece of limited animation. And the way limited animation works is within a frame, you don't animate everything in the frame at the same time. Think of a really good example of that would be, think of Scooby-Doo, Flintstones, the Jetsons, Yogi Bear. If you notice, for example, when Yogi Bear talks, oftentimes only his head will move around and everything below the collar on his neck will be completely static. And it's the same thing a lot of the time with Scooby-Doo characters and like that, where it's just like, we just animate the bits that absolutely need to move. In case of dialogue, that's often the mouth, and certainly you can see this in anime. If you watch anime with the sound off, a lot of shots are just going to be static faces with the mouth just moving, opening and closing over and over again as the character delivers dialogue. That's limited animation. That means we only animate exactly what needs to be animated and absolutely no more. Limited animation has degrees. Obviously, the principle of the style is don't move anything more than you need to. Like, don't do 24 frames per second unless you need 24 frames per second to communicate the movement. And you can see that happening as we get animated on 1s as Yone rises up here, because that feeling, like that sudden, like, sudden getting up needs that immediacy of that, like, of animating on 1s, getting that whoof up. But then once he's up, here you can see perhaps in the compression artifacts on the screen that I'm swapping between two frames, but Yone isn't moving or doing anything. Nothing is changing about the art on screen. And then we go here. So here we are animating briefly on 2s, because we go 1, 2, oh, actually 3s. 1, 2, 3. This frame here sticks around for 1, 2, 3 frames. Then it swaps to another one, and that sticks around for 1, 2 frames, and then that sticks around for 1, 2 frames, and then 1, 2, 3 frames. So, like, you vary out the pacing depending on the feeling of the motion that you want to deliver. And especially when you're delivering, like, really complex character acting, like when they're really, like, emoting with their faces, and you need the eyes to kind of dart around, and you need them to look thoughtful, and you need to have subtle facial animation. In those situations, oftentimes you'll animate on 1s or 2s because you really need the subtlety of movement there. But when we're dealing with something like, for example, here. Take a look at Yone himself. Like there. That little... He sits still in this pose for like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9... 9 frames. He just sits there. He doesn't move. Nothing happens with his character model. And then snap! And then he sits still, and then you can see he settles down. So here, because we're zoomed out really, really far, there's not that much reason to, like, do a really careful step-by-step animation of him, like, snapping his head to the side, looking around, trying to figure out where he is. So instead, you get, like, this. Like that kind of snappy feeling, because we're looking at it from afar. The immediate subtlety of like every motion of his body, not really important at this scale. And because most of this short, as we talked about, is a mood piece, like it's quiet, it's contemplative, it doesn't really want to like excite you or like get you moving. Even when we get frames like this one, where there's movement on, I think it's every frame actually. Let's see. No, every Ari's spell effects on her tail there are animated on 2s, the visual effects there. But even when you get that, it's a very quiet frame. It's a very still thing. Let's take a look at that. And by the way, notice that Ari's tail, the way it's unfolded, makes the symbol of the Spirit Blossom skin line that we can see... Yeah, there. It makes that symbol, so the iconography of the Spirit Blossom skin line is injected into the thing. Now let's take a look at that folding animation for the tail, because that's interesting. Yeah. Much like a flower, you can see how it kind of spins together around itself to wrap itself up into a little bud. That's a lovely little bit of animation. And it's kind of complicated because you need to manage this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And you need to manage those layers so that it doesn't look like they just pop out of existence. Like, it needs to look like that they're folding up on each other and disappearing into themselves. Which is actually kind of a difficult thing to do smoothly, and you can see one of the ways that the animator is handling it is once they fold up, like once they all become one mass around here, take a look at that curving of this curve that leads down and then leads into the tail. You get these swooping S curves around, and take notice of how that curve is being used to kind of naturally just recede the tail into Ari's butt. Like, it basically recedes into her, or shrinks into her, and that little swipe, that little swirl of that S-curve helps sell that motion so much better than if you had just, like, shrunk it down with, like, a Photoshop action. That would have looked terrible, but because you have that swipe where it kind of slurps itself into itself, it has this natural, organic feeling that like, makes it feel natural, and you don't really bother about it or think about it. Ari also seems to be animated on 2s? 1, 2, 1, 2, and 2, and 2. 3s, actually. And that contributes to the sense, like, when you look at anime and you go, oh, this feels like anime. A lot of the reason why anime feels like anime, a lot of the reason why it feels the way it does, is because of its specific animation timings that are a huge part of especially how anime is constructed. And when I saw this thing the first time, my sense was, hang on, this has, like, this blinking motion, for example, because what I can tell when he blinks, this is very subtle, but look at the lines around the nose. You see how they boil a little bit? You see how, like, all the lines of the face just, they wiggle just a little tiny bit when Yone blinks. You can see it perhaps if I do it quickly. And that tells me that they actually redrew the entire frame. Like, this entire picture was redrawn for each frame of that blinking animation. Which anime typically doesn't do. Like I said, in anime, it's very typical that if you wanted to do a blink like that, you would just have most of the face be copy-pasted frame to frame, and then only animate the eyes. But what this little boil, this little line boil tells me, is that they actually redrew it frame by frame, which is not usual for anime. And there's tons of little things like that makes me feel like this animation was probably not created by an anime studio, or maybe the art director had something specific in mind, but it feels like it has a more Western aesthetic to it in that regard. I quite like this getting up animation, because Yone, he retreats out of the frame so that we can look at Ari, and then we get this sense of him standing up, where you can see, like, he's leaning into the frame, his shoulder comes down, and I think they've even put a little bit of blur. Yeah, they put a little bit of camera blur, of lens blur, on his artwork, so that it looks like he's too close to the camera and he's actually a little bit out of focus. That's quite clever. Where he leans down, and you can see he puts his weight on his front legs, and then he pushes off, and then you can see he stands up into the frame. And that's a really difficult motion to communicate, actually, when you only have, like, the left bit of his upper torso and some of his left leg to do it with. So to really show off, like, the idea of him getting up, standing up, and then walking into, like, this, it's actually kind of a difficult thing to do. Well done that they managed to pull that off. Like, that they managed to communicate that motion. Because that's actually hard. So, let's see. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So, 3s and 4s. We're moving on here. And take note of how that informs the... Like, you can see that little bit of jerkiness to the motion, right? That little bit of... That little bit of stiffness, like how the character kind of snaps between two positions like that. That's something that's visible specifically when you're working on those timings. But also see how it has a very different sense and feeling for... As Yone... Like, when we get this... Like, look at his face. That relatively subtle facial expression of him being surprised by what he sees. So those timings, like, have very different feelings depending on whether the character is doing some kind of fast movement or moderately speed movement where he's, like, walking forward, or whether he's very slowly rearing back and reacting to something that's happening. With those animation timings, again, the choice of which timing to use is one of the creative decisions that, for me, is very interesting, because, like, that tells you something about... Because, like, animating on 1s and 2s is also bloody expensive. At 24 frames per second, that means you have to do 24 frickin' drawings for just 1 second of animation. Even animating on 2s, that's still 12 drawings per second. Which is why... Most productions don't, like, even Disney movies very rarely animate at 24 frames per second. So the choice of when to use which timing, like when to prioritize your budget, when to tell your artists and animators, hey, you need to spend a lot of time drawing these characters doing stuff, which I think is also part of the reason why we don't get that many full body shots of Yone early on. Notice this as I try and do a little bit of a scroll through the thing, is like we get this sort of most of his body, but not really his feet or his legs, so you don't have to bother about placing him in the environment, really. And we get this close-up on his face, and we get, like, this little bit of, like, just his torso moving, and then we get these, like, far distance shots, where you don't have to do, like, render all of the detail of the face or all of the detail of the hair. You just put 2 little lines on the hair, and that's, yeah, his hair is fine now. Where, like, you don't have to do a lot of detail, and then... the time when they do decide, now we're going to spend our animation budget, now we're going to go all the hell the way out, is here at the end when Yone is doing all of this stuff, when the demon comes out and we get this epic fight scene between them. That's when they spend their animation budget. That's when they say, okay, this is what we want people to spend the absolute most amount of time getting exactly right, because this is the climax, this is the moment that this thing needs to sing, this is the moment when this needs to be as badass as humanly possible. This is where we concentrate our budget. By comparison, Yone wandering around the spirit world, yeah, it's like, we animated that on 3s and 4s, we don't, like, it doesn't need all that budget in order to sell the feeling that it's going for, which, as we talked about, is this quiet, contemplative wander through the afterlife kind of sensation that we're working with. And for my money, I think the particular frame rate they choose here, let's see, the timing. Yeah, it's animated on 3s. It also works really well from this distance, because it still looks smooth. Like, even though it's animated on 3s rather than 2s or 1s, it still looks quite smooth. And I will say also, animating on 3s is still a higher frame rate than, like, most anime, at least certainly most seasonal anime. They don't usually animate on 3s for, like, most things. Because, again, anime is such a budget-conscious genre of animation. This thing, because it's a promotional thing that's created for one thing, and it's probably got a longer production schedule and probably a higher budget, since it's Riot paying for the whole thing, they can afford to be a little bit more extravagant. And then we get this shot. I'm curious about the frame timing here as Yone walks past the gate. Let's see. Yeah, here they're animating on mostly 2s, yeah. And I think that's because when you have this, like, when Yone walks past the gate and reveals the dark version of it that springs up behind him, which, by the way, on the front of him there's light, on the back of him there's shadow. So, shadow on his back, light on his front. The director is just doing a really good job of using the visuals of the animation to tell the story, that it's as he passes by with shadows on his back that he reveals the dark gate. Anyway, I think they chose the... Like, when Yone walks past the gate and reveals the dark version of it that springs up behind him, which, by the way, on the front of him there's light, on the back of him there's shadow. So, shadow on his back, light on his front. The director is just doing a really good job of using the visuals of the animation to tell the story, that it's as he passes by with shadows on his back that he reveals the dark gate. Anyway, I think they chose the yeah, chose to animate this bit on 2s because it really kind of needs to be smooth. You have to have this smooth reveal of Yone almost wiping the gate, the dark gate, into existence as he walks past, which is also why they chose to have Yone, like, take up the whole frame, so that they could just have this bit of like, the broken down old gate, and then they can just kind of have him mask the wipe as they transition into the other gate instead. Which is a clever way to do things. Okay, I think we've talked enough about the beginning now. Let's talk about the good stuff. Let's talk about the fun stuff, the real fun stuff, because this is also where the direction of the thing switches. There's 2 things. First, note, when Yone first arrives in the afterlife, we get this shot of him, tiny, surrounded by water in this infinite space, this infinite void around him. And then as he enters the dark world, exactly the same shot. Yone on this tiny little island in the middle, surrounded by water, as it turns out, as we see once he steps into it. Yeah, there. But also looking very small against the thing that he's trapped within. And this is also where the camera direction changes. Rather than these static shots that are like from the side, looking at a particular feature in the environment, now the camera direction changes as well. We get this shot of, like, looking down at Yone's feet, looking up at Yone from down below. We get these Dutch angles, which is where you have the horizon line. As in, like, you look at a shot like this one. You can see the horizon is, like, right there, and it's flat. It's completely horizontal in the shot. But a shot like this one right here, if there is a horizon line, it's skewed like that. That's a Dutch angle, and in film, it's a very common thing. If you want characters to feel like they're off balance, if you want the scene to feel like something's wrong or not quite right, using a Dutch angle communicates that feeling of unbalance, because it's as though you're looking at the whole thing with your head tilted, as though you're off balance as a viewer. And that transitions into how the characters are feeling. And here also, I do believe we get... See when the cherry blossoms get in there. Yeah, they move on 1s. The cherry blossoms are animated on a combination of 1s and 2s, as far as I can tell. Which must have been a crap ton of work, frankly. Yeah, and here you can see the ones that move into the foreground here, they move on every frame, but when they dart into the foreground, take a look what happens to the ones in the background. They only move on every other frame. And again, that's using frame timings to create this different sensation of depth and volume in the things that are moving. And it's just like, oh, I mean, this is Disney levels of effects animation. Like, this is stuff that you'd see in Pocahontas. Which is a terrible movie, but gorgeous visual effects. So there's one thing, I want to return to the lore thing a little bit briefly. There's one thing about this scene that bothers me. It's when Yone drags his own body around and sees his own corpse lying there on the ground, and we reveal the whole scene, where this seems to be, as far as I can tell, like, these are people getting killed during the Noxian invasion. I think that's the idea here, that Noxus is being invaded and people are being murdered left, right, and center, and what the voice says is, as Ari realizes that he's lost and retreats, "You could have saved them." And that bothers me a little bit, because that implies to me that the story of Yone is one where it's like, the thing that draws him back to life and the thing that draws the demon to him is like his anger and his lust for revenge. But it's like, we already have Varys, though. Like, we already have an Ionian character, even, where that's the whole thing of they have a dark side that's powered by all their negative emotions, and they have to hold on to their good side and their humanity in order to do everything. We already have that. I really hope this doesn't become, "You could have saved them," revenge, anger thing, because that would be kind of, that would be stepping on Varys' territory. But we'll talk about that once we do What's the Deal with Yone, once we actually have some lore about him. Again, camera angles, Dutch angles, everything kind of off-center, off-balance. And you get this as well here, much more subtly, when you get these little mirror reflections of Yone reflected in his own sword. Again, notice how the angle, especially in this one, is just a little bit off. And by the way, props to the animator, because this is fucking difficult. Because they have to replicate the same motion between both. They can't just copy-paste this shit. At least I don't think they did. They have to replicate the same motion between the two versions of Yone in the swords, so they have to be animated on the same timing, and they have to be moving like with the same directionality. And you can probably get away with fudging that a little bit, but you do need to be kind of accurate and precise about exactly how you do it, because if you get it wrong, it's one of those things where if you get it just a little bit too wrong, everybody can tell that, hang on, that doesn't look right, even if they won't be able to articulate quite why. It's one of those things that's like it's a bit of a flex to do a shot like that and get it right, but well done to the animator. And here again, we're back to 2s and 3s, I think? Yeah. And I do love, like, I really like the, like, there. Like, notice that little flare of his hakama, the skirt thing that he's wearing. Notice how it flares out a little bit as he sits down. Like, there. Like, that little poof out as he gets down. That's a really lovely little motion. And I do love how they're using the hair as well on Yone here. Like, you get this it kind of droops and kind of hangs down over him like this heavy blanket almost. It's a really lovely feeling. And here again, I spot a little bit of boiling. Yeah. Oh, that's good. So for this shot, apparently, as far as I can tell, they didn't just say grab this with a Photoshop tool and move it upwards a little bit. They actually redrew every single frame of this little reveal, like of Yone reacting to the sight of his own dead body. And you can see, if I go in for the fine control here, if you take a close look at the lines on his face, you can see that they change from frame to frame. And again, that's something that's like effort that you kind of didn't need to go to. You could have just copy-pasted it and kept it completely the same and just subtly moved it in the frame, but they didn't. They actually redrew each frame of Yone here. And that's... Or, I mean, maybe they have some kind of filter that can imitate the boiling on the line and make it seem like they've redrawn it. Either way, the reason I think why they do that is because it gives a different feeling to this. Like, it gives it just this slightly more alive feeling than you would have if you just straight up copy-pasted it. Because there is that little boiling, that little quiver on every line of the character. You get a slightly better sense that they're alive, rather than just being a static shot that's repeating itself. And some lovely effects animation here as well. And again, the cherry blossoms come down from above and reveal everything around him. All these figures of Ionians being cut down by something. It's not clear what they're being cut down by the way. Like, I imagine it's probably Noxians. But it's not clear who or what is cutting them down. And my pet theory is that the thing that's cutting them down is actually Yone. Like, it's... once Yone gets possessed by the demon, this is what it wants him to do. This is what it wants to make him do, but it's using visions of what he will become himself to tempt him or anger him enough that it can corrupt him. Yeah, because look at this. Look at this. Here we have only... It's really... Like, between these two frames, it's just the eyes doing that and eyebrows doing that little motion. Here, they didn't bother to redraw everything in the frame. They didn't need to, because... The next moment they go into here, and here you can see as he closes his eyes, look at the little shaking, that little shake there. Oh, that's such a good little gesture, because you get the sense, you get the feeling of like you can feel that tension building up inside him. You can feel that there's this scream, these emotions, all these feelings boiling up inside him, and he's having trouble dealing with them. And that's why they bother, like, where here, they don't bother to redraw the frame between these two, because that's not necessary. But here, between every frame of this little wiggle, this little shake that he does, they redraw the whole frame, as far as I can tell. Yeah, mostly. And that's what gives it that shaking sense of living tension, rather than being something static, and I really like that. And then, as we return to look at Ari, notice how the shot goes completely back to the shots that we started with. It's the same kind of shot that we got when we were looking at the environments here. Like this static shot with something noticeable centered in the image, something important. So what we get here as Ari lowers her ears and fades away is this last look at peace, last look at a chance of serenity, rather than all this anger and destruction and all these like Dutch angles and all this chaos, we get this last steady shot as she fades away, and then we're back in the chaos. Here's another lovely subtle... Oh, that's so good. I'm such a sucker for, like, really subtle facial animation. And we get that here with Yone. Like, you see that slow accretion of the lines growing more and more pronounced on his face, and his eyes widening more and more, and his teeth clenching up, and the shoulders raising, and the muscles tensing, and you get that full sense of him, like... He even seems to be growing a little bit, like he's expanding. And you can see that especially up around his shoulders if you pay attention to this line right here. See that? Like how he basically expands, like his whole physical form inflates with anger so that he has no choice but to explode. And this is when the animators really start to flex, and I love it. There. Smear frame! Love me a smear frame. I'm so happy about smear frames. So I talked about smear frames a lot before, but also notice the squash and stretch distortion that's happening to Yone a little bit. As he rears up for this, like, look at how his arms, like, they almost become rubbery a little bit as we get this smack. And it's not like Disney-style squash and stretch, which would be much more pronounced and extreme, but there's just a little bit of that, of like his whole body warping around the power of the movement that he's doing. My one criticism here is I would have liked to see a little bit of like some debris kicking up or some screen shake or something to really communicate the slam that he's doing on the ground. But here's where the animators start to flex a little bit. Like, look at that red and blue rings in the water, and the reflection of Yone himself. Like, animating reflections is so difficult, and especially when you're doing it with, like, he's distorted in the water, right? But that's him, right? That you can see as these little ripples resolve, it solidifies a little bit into a shape that you go, oh, hey, that could look like Yone. And then you see him rear back, and then we cut to a match shot where we see the arms rearing up again and smack down into the ground. And then this. Oh, this is good. Slow demon just revealing itself. And this is, I love liquid animation. Like, I love when animators have to make liquids feel really good. And they do here. Like, it feels like blood, right? It feels really goopy and grody, and then, haha, oh, you've caused some problems on purpose. And the match cut between the eyes as well. Notice how the eyes are placed in exactly the same position in the frame. Like, their faces are in the same position in the frame. As the demon rises up, so does Yone rise up and slam down. And as he slams down, you can see the demon in the background apparently also doing something. As, like, the demon slams down and gets ready to rise up, you can see it begins to lift its shoulders. But then we cut to a match where the demon and Yone are occupying exactly the same spot in the frame. And you can see that the demon and Yone are rising at the same time. And then finally we get the confirmation. Where we pan back, another Dutch angle, because of course we're off balance. Yone is extremely emotional right now. Where we see that the demon is literally mirroring his motions. And then finally it rises up and challenges him. For dominance over his soul, basically. There was another smear frame. Here. Yeah. Well, more than one. I really like, because when you're doing something that's this close up, getting that sense of speed and motion can be kind of difficult when the thing you're animating takes up the entire frame. So these little distortions, these little wiggles that follow the direction of movement, like he's moving downwards fast, so it's like his whole body is kind of smearing upwards, do a lot to help sell the power of the motion that he's doing. And again, oh, that liquid animation, I love it. Smearing again here, using the light on the blade to smear it out as it throws a few water droplets away. And even then, I do like the tiny little detail that Yone is here. Like, you see his hair, you see his shoulders, he's completely out of focus, but they still animate him. Notice how the body wiggles a little bit, like you get this sense of him almost sobbing or crying into the statue that he's been pounding on. So you still get that sense of life from him, which is lovely. And then, here's a good use of lighting, by the way. Shadow, 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 pretty much everywhere, but this bright light right here on his eyes that are framed between the body and the hair, making sure like this is the point of interest that our eyes are lit to immediately, so when Yone does this, we see it instantly, that his eyes snap open as he realizes that this ugly fella is coming for him. And then, boom, flash frame. I love me some flash frames as well. As the entire scene is revealed, and notice what the ground looks like. Notice the color, cherry blossom red again. And notice also the position of the characters. Like here, there's no animation on Yone or the demon. They are standing completely stock still. They're not moving a muscle or an inch. Nothing about their models is moving at all. Because for this shot right here, they need to not be the focus. We need to not care about what they're doing at all. They need to be standing stock still, because what we need to see is the veil being pulled back and the darkness disappearing. And this scene emerging around them of swords being shattered and smashed to pieces, of people being torn apart and dying. And then we get our first establishment of the power relationship between the two. Look at this frame. Who do you think is winning right now? Like, who's in control? Who's got the upper hand right now? Quite literally the demon, because he's above Yone, first of all. Secondly, his sword, like, cuts off like half of the screen for him, but it's a much bigger portion than Yone has. Yone is clearly being pushed back, and then Yone's sword is hiding his face as well. So you have this sense of him being trapped, being confined, like being hidden behind things closing in on him. Whereas for the demon, you have all this lovely open space for it to occupy, which gives a greater sense of its freedom and its strength in this situation. And that, of course, only increases as the demon pushes in on him, and like even further decreases Yone's amount of space. That's some sexy animation right there. And then Dragon Ball, disappear. And I do like, as it vanishes, the pressure it was putting on Yone's swords also vanished. So he goes like, whoop, off balance, stumbles forward, catches himself, and then the demon does the Dragon Ball teleports behind you, nothing personnel kid. And then this lovely effect of, like, the swords. This is basically stolen straight from The Last Jedi. They're doing a reverse Last Jedi, where instead of revealing red underneath the white, they're revealing black underneath the red, which is very cool. And I do like that you can actually follow the demon's motions. That's kind of cool. I didn't realize that when I was watching it in full speed, but you can actually follow, like, it turns into a shadow, darts behind him, and then Yone sees it, and then it darts around again. Lots of motion blur. I wish they didn't. Like, this is my pet peeve. All this motion blur kind of just annoys me. Like, sometimes it's useful to have the motion blur, but I prefer animation smearing. Like, I prefer, if you want to have the character look blurry and kind of smeared out, then do animation smearing. That's much more interesting to me. Oh yeah, here. A doubling effect to communicate the speed of the strike. You get this one frame of doubling, where he basically has two hands for a second. Yeah. Yone and the demon are mostly moving on the same frame timing, which makes sense since they're fighting. I could look at this all day. So here we're just doing fully animated on 2s and 3s. And here, again, notice, we talked about early on about how the camera, for the most part, throughout this entire short, has been completely static. Like, it hasn't done anything. It's just sat still in whatever angle it's being attached to. But here, the camera is panning back and forth as the two of them are fighting. Here, the camera, like, closes in on Yone, follows his face around as he whips around to the demon. Then it zooms in on the demon's sword as it crashes towards Yone's blocking swords. And then it follows the shards of the swords as they, like, travel over Yone's shoulder. And then as he falls back, the camera itself pulls back from him as well. And then it follows him down into the dirt as he rolls around, tracks him while he's flying around. Then we stand still as he catches himself. And then again, once the demon comes into frame, whoom, the camera zooming in right with us as he's, like, closing in on it. So, like, here the camera it goes from static to utterly dynamic. And I love that transition because, again, that sells the feeling of, oh, we have entered a different space now. This is a different mode of being, where the spirit realm itself is serene, here it's full of chaos and movement. And I also love, like, look at how the demon moves here. Look at this little move. Yeah, that. Like liquid. It's like liquid, kind of basically boiling out of the ground, like a snake almost, as it swipes towards him. God, that's a lovely way to do it. Because a shot like this, like pulling this off, like of him being knocked back, falling into the dirt, rolling over, and then you're down here beside him, making that feel smooth, so that, like, even though we're, like, this is a bloody chaos, right? You can still follow what happens. Like, it's boom, Yone gets knocked back. And that's why we have this, like, when he gets hit and the sword shatters, we have this little moment right here. This little moment of things moving a little bit slowly, just so we can catch, okay, he's falling backwards, and then boom. Dust and chaos wipes us into this tumbling over himself backwards as he finally catches himself and stops and realizes, oh, I'm missing a sword here. That's also when he gets pissed off. And notice what happens. He grows horns as his power explodes. Which I think is really cool. And he also does the Ghibli thing. You know, in Ghibli movies, when a character's, like, upset or full of emotion or something angers them, their hair starts to boil up and rise. The same thing is happening to Yone right here as his power grows, as he's about to go Super Saiyan, basically. You can see that it's like... This is such a cool sequence. I could look at this all day. Now, this bit, on the other hand, like, he brings the sword up, parries, and then, I guess with the other sword, he kind of lifts the demon and grabs his arm. That bit, to me, is somewhat more poorly communicated. I'm not really 100% sure. Like, when you see that in full motion... Wait, hang on. What happened? What? How? Because it's a little... We're zoomed in so close... And even though the animator is doing a great job of it, I think we're zoomed in too close where it's really hard to see what's actually happening, which I think is a little bit of a... Like, it doesn't matter. We know what happens. We see that the demon gets flipped over him and thrown away. But it's a little bit of a pity that we don't get a clearer sense of exactly how Yone turns the tables on him. Or indeed how the hell he gets a hold of the demon's sword. Like, that's the other thing. It's like, I think that's supposed to be what's happening here, that his arm reaches out and grasps, and then you can see he's got the sword in hand. How exactly that happened, though, I wish we had a bit of better understanding of it. And then he transforms the demon sword into Spirit Blossom Yone's sword. As we do the full, like, this, now we're just full anime bullshit. Now we're just going completely devil trigger almost. Like, yeah, it's basically what he's doing. He's doing a devil trigger. That's what he's doing. And now it's the demon's turn to have this shock moment. And then, oh, look at that. Boom. Flash frame, and you can see the dust being kicked up behind him. And then this streak of blue. Oh, such good anime bullshit. I love it. Look at that. And you can see, like, that streak of, like, blowing the entire red dust, or the... perhaps those are cherry blossoms, actually. Of the whole scene, just... out of his way, and then bye-bye, demon boy. Slashy, slashy. And he slashes not only the demon, like, he doesn't only cut through the demon itself, he cuts through the entire environment. He cuts through the entire illusion of the place. He cuts through the darkness. He cuts through the scene of destruction. He cuts through everything. All of it. And so it burns away and fades. As the demon gives him a little kiss to send him off. Nom! But, like, in terms of, again, returning to the idea of canon in this thing, insofar as we're supposed to interpret any of what happens here as canonical at all, it seems to me that Spirit Blossom Yone then is going to be a skin of Yone where he conquers the demon, and that's why he has the magic Spirit Blossom version of the sword. And then in-game actual champion Yone is going to be a version where he doesn't conquer the demon so much, because that one has, well, first of all, it has a mask that looks disturbingly like that demon's face. And second of all, that's clearly the demon version of the sword. He's got the arm patched up and the whole thing with the things. And yet, as he looks over, you can see that the power begins to creep up his arm, right? And he's like, oh, human beings, let's kill them, let's kill them, let's kill them, let's kill them. And then he goes, no! And you get blue, like the color of Yone. Yone's power, his particular color, shining through the mask, and apparently dismissing that demonic power that was creeping up his arm, saying, nope, get back in the sword. We're not doing the murder thing right now. Oh, right, there's a lovely camera move here as well. He flips the demon over, the demon lands, and then look how the camera... Here we see, like, the bottom of the demon. This is where the demon's legs would be, as the camera pans around the demon quickly. And then Yone comes into frame, plants himself, and goes Devil Trigger. So there's this lovely circular motion of the camera, which is a little harder to see at normal speed, but which becomes really clear when you watch it happen like this. Which, again, kudos to the animators, because animating anything rotating in 3D space is difficult. Like, it's a difficult thing to do, especially with, like, anime bullshit characters. Like, especially when it's not, like, a block or a ball or something like that, when you have to animate like a character, especially characters that have so many strange details and like that have these very flat stylizations as anime characters. That's a difficult discipline. Like, it takes time, it takes effort, it takes commitment to get it right, because again, it's one of those things where if you get it just a little bit wrong, like if you just get a little bit too wrong, it doesn't look right, and people go, hang on, no, wait, that doesn't work for me, that doesn't sell the impact. Bad touch, bad touch! Stranger danger! Nom! 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 Me, when I've just found a new anime and I'm gonna tell someone about it. Hey, have you heard about JoJo? Anyway, I think that's about all of it. So, yeah. If you enjoyed this long, unstructured ramble about the animation of the Spirit Blossom Ionian Myth animated trailer Yone demon, maybe canon, maybe not thing, then I would appreciate it if you hit the like button down below, because hitting the like button down below tells YouTube that this video got engagement, and that's what determines whether YouTube bothers to show, like, any of my videos to other people, and this is my job, so I could really use the help. If you want to help me out more directly than that, then I have a Patreon, a merchandise store, and a tip jar. If you want to use any of them, I'd be grateful for the help, and if not, that's completely okay as well. I've been talking a lot. If you don't want to support me on Patreon, though, that's completely fine. I will encourage you, though, to, with content creators, like if you have a content creator whose work you enjoy online, consider supporting them directly with anything you can, whenever you can, because that, like, that $1 or $2 donation, that little bit of pocket change, that actually means the same as literally thousands of views on a video. Like, it makes a huge amount of difference, much more than it feels like. And especially for smaller or niche content creators, like, the algorithm, the advertisement revenue isn't much, so those direct donations make an outsized impact on people's abilities to do this stuff for, like, either for a living, like I do, or just as a side gig, like something they do in addition to their normal job. So, you know, if there's an online content creator whose work you enjoy, whether it's me or someone else, please consider supporting them directly with anything you can, whenever you can. Down at the top of the description, you'll also find a link to a page that has various charities, bail funds, and general ways that you can support some of the people who are currently fighting against the horrible ravages of police brutality in the United States. Just because the media has stopped reporting on it doesn't, unfortunately, mean that it's stopped happening. Outside of that, what else do I have to promote? Right, I have a second channel. I do Let's Plays over there. I play some Legends of Runeterra. Yone is in that. So, Final Fantasy IX, Monster Hunter World. What else are we doing? Right, The World Ends With You. And other games also, probably, at some point. You can go over there and also like, comment, and subscribe on that one if you want to. And if not, again, don't worry about it. It's completely fine. Thank you very much for watching. Please remember to wash your hands and have solidarity with those who are trying to make the world a better place. God, this was a cool bit of animation.